Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the panel, Breakthrough Medicine, Will Finding a Cure Be the Start of Saving Lives? My name is Louise Perkins, and I'm the Chief Science Officer at the Melanoma Research Alliance, or MRA. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us today. A quick word about MRA. We're a unique nonprofit founded in 2007 by Deborah and Leon Black under the auspices of the Milken Institute. We find and fund the most promising research around the world to defeat this deadly disease of melanoma, whose incidence is on the rise and which claims a patient every hour in the US and tens of thousands around the globe every year. Much of our funded research, which totals $68 million to date, is geared towards identifying and improving the next new treatments for melanoma, especially treatments for patients with late-stage disease. Why focus on that late-stage disease? Because these patients have the poorest prognosis. Most of those patients will not live for more than a year if left untreated. Early detection is critical to improving the outcome for melanoma patients. And of course, treating cancer, the best way to treat a cancer is to not get it in the first place. And regular skin checks can save lives in the business of melanoma and other skin cancers. And skin checks are really a great way to make sure that people are healthy and happy. If I could have slide number 2, please. To help amplify this message, there is a Skin Check Pledge campaign that we're undertaking that I wanted to just take a quick moment to highlight. For each person who pledges to get a skin cancer screening, iPrio domain and select MRA donors will commit $100 up to a total of $250,000, 100% of which will be contributed to the research. I can assure you this is a great way to contribute to the research and is fairly painless. I did it this morning. The most complicated part of the process is typing in the URL. So I would encourage you to do that. Coming back to breakthrough medicines, though, for those patients who do present with late-stage disease, incredible progress has been made, with 8 treatments approved since 2011. And these treatments include some of the cutting-edge approaches in medicine in general. Personalized medicine approaches for melanoma are used, which are treatments that are matched to a patient's tumor mutation, and several of these have been approved since 2011. And in addition, immunotherapy approaches have been approved. Immunotherapy is the business of making your own immune system recognize and reject the cancer as foreign. And this is the latest tool in the toolkit to battle cancer, and it's a particularly intriguing one in the disease. But significant advances have been made not just in cancer. Advances have been made in a number of chronic diseases like cystic fibrosis, HIV/AIDS, as well as diabetes. And new tools and new technologies are both in use and on the horizon that come as a consequence of innovative research. Of course, none of this comes for free. The cost to create these breakthrough drugs threatens to break the innovators who develop them, as well as the entities that pick up the tab to pay for the fundamental research that moves them forward. How are new medicines integrated into the standard of care to ensure all patients have equal access to the most promising treatments? And what are the barriers? What do they mean for patients and their doctors? We can take the slide off, please. Briefly, I'd like to introduce you to our terrific panel of experts that we've assembled to address these questions, discuss lessons learned, and describe the collaborative models that are being used to advance these breakthrough approaches. To my right, I have Jill DeSimone, Senior Vice President and the U.S. Oncology team at Merck. She previously held positions at Teva Pharmaceuticals and at Bristol Myers Squibb. To my left, Omid Hamid is Director at the Melanoma Center and Chief of Translational Research and Immuno-Oncology at the Angeles Clinic and Research Institute. And his research focuses on immunotherapy in melanoma and other cancers. Daniel Hilferty at the end is President and CEO of Independence Blue Cross, a leading U.S. health insurer. He's served as an advisor to policy initiatives aimed at transforming the U.S. healthcare system through innovative approaches and models of care that increase quality and lower costs. Gideon Bollag on the end is Chief Executive Officer at Plexicon, and prior to his role as CEO, he held several positions of responsibility in scientific leadership at the company, as well as in other companies. Altogether, Gideon has more than 23 years of experience in finding new drugs in the biotechnology industry. And lastly, and not least, Wyatt Decker is the Chief Executive Officer at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. He is also Vice President of the Mayo Clinic, the largest not-for-profit integrated multi-specialty group practice in the nation. He's Professor of Medicine at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine. As we were preparing for this conversation, we realized that the perspectives that everyone on this panel brings touches on different aspects of this problem of bringing new innovation forward and continuing to bring new innovation forward into the future. But really, to get us forward, we're going to focus a little bit on an easy question, which I'll direct first to Dan Hilferty. Dan, what do you think is the single biggest challenge and the single biggest opportunity this year in 2015 to advancing a more personalized, individualized approach to medicine?
Well, Louise, thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this panel, and welcome to all of you late in the afternoon on the second day of the summit. It's great to see the room filled. I have to take a step back and give you a perspective. I'm an insurer. I run Independence Health Group, the parent of the Philadelphia-based Blue Cross plan, as well as a number of subsidiaries under the tagline Amura Health. We're in 24 states in the District of Columbia. We serve just under 10 million people and growing. And we're in everything from full commercial coverage of national accounts like Comcast to the individual programs through the state exchanges to Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, dual eligibles, and we have a full array of ancillaries, including pharmacy benefit management, vision, dental, and everything that you can think of, stop-loss reinsurance. So our perspective is, as we look to the future, and it's about driving up quality and bringing down cost, we realize that the key issue that needs to be addressed is collaboration across the group of us, whether we're in pharma, whether we run hospitals, whether we're researchers or oncologists, that we have to find a way to get on the same page. And we do that through reimbursement that is driven by meeting certain quality targets, certain efficiency targets. And when you get everybody aligned around trying to meet a common goal, we think that we have the best chance of reaching the most people, regardless of economic situation or where they fall on other spectrums. And so that's the key thing that we'd like to see continue to develop over the next year, that there's a spirit of collaboration, both through contracting and through the way we come together on various initiatives, especially around chronic care.
Great. Thank you very much. So I talked a little bit about the changes in the melanoma landscape as at the beginning of my remarks. I'd like to actually ask Omid Hamid to talk a little bit more and to delve into some of the detail on that, mindful that we have a broad audience in front of us, to talk about what are some of the changes in the care for cancer patients, and also to speak a little bit from your perspective, Omid, in a so-called community oncology practice. What are some of the challenges that you faced this year using these breakthrough approaches?
Well, thank you for the ability to expand on that. It's been an amazing couple of years in melanoma. To take a step back, we've always known what's wrong and why we're getting these cancers, but we've never known how to really take care of that. We've understood that our immune system should be able to clear out cancer like we clear out a virus. We've known that genetic changes make our cells lose the ability to be controlled and then grow unexpectedly and become malignant. And over the last couple of years, especially for the field of melanoma, we've understood where these genetic changes are. We have developed, through collaboration, the drugs that target those mutations, those changes in our genes that happen because of sun exposure, carcinogen exposure, those changes that lead us to have these malignancies. We've identified them in the past, but now we have the drugs that are able to target them and target them effectively. Through targeting mutations like BRAF and NRAS, those are mutations that you don't really need to know as a layperson, but to understand that giving the drugs that target these lead to 70–80% benefits. Or through the understanding that in the past we have seen the immune system ramp up and control cancer, and we've understood now what are the ways that we can take the brakes off of the immune system and rev it up so that it understands and it targets malignancy. In a normal system, as we're sitting here, the idea of having an active immune system going full tilt is not good. It leads to autoimmune disease. I'd have ulcerative colitis, you'd have Crohn's and psoriasis. And our body is set up to mount an immune response and then stop. What we've learned to do is target the immune system in a way to take those stops off, to allow our immune system to target these melanoma cells. And we've taken it forward through collaboration with pharma, through collaboration with research, and have applied this now not just to melanoma. Melanoma is a small fish, but lung cancer, certain types of breast cancer, the numbers are amazing in response in lymphoma. So it's a new day where we can look at changing these malignancies and changing the lives of these patients into something of a more chronic disease state. I had a patient today, when I told him his scans looked great, he said, I wasn't expecting health. And really, through these drugs, we've been able to bring that forward and make that an expectation that I have when I enter the room for every patient. Now, it's wonderful to sit where I sit in a research institute and say that I have these. The issue has been the ability to translate these successes into what I call the end user. The patient who's in Idaho who doesn't have the access to these clinics, the patient who's in a normal, regular general oncologist's office. And that's the issue that we need to seek to clarify and solve through collaboration with pharma, industry, insurance. The ability to not only have these drugs readily available in the local oncologist's office, but to ensure that the education is there, that everyone understands how to use them, when to use them, and to fix the cost of care in a way that it's available for all. Not just in the short term, where we hear about bolus costs, but because all of these diagnoses hopefully will become chronic in the long term, where you see patients who, as Luis mentioned, would come in and have a 6 to 8 month median survival. The median survivals that we're seeing now for melanoma are greater than a year, nearing 2 years. And that's accelerated. That's happened within 2 to 3 years. And that will happen, hopefully, for all of these malignancies. So we have a lot of work ahead for us, but it's a bright future.
There's really been so much progress. I mean, Omid touched on a couple of key points. The advent of the use of drugs that are matched to a patient's particular genetic profile is one thing. And where do those come from, and how do we continue to develop treatments like that? Likewise, he also talked about these immunotherapy approaches that are re-energizing your own immune system to engage and fight off the cancer. But these, as much as these drugs, these latter category, are miracles in and of themselves, they're not the be-all and end-all for every kind of patient. And we need to be sure that there is continued support, continued means to have these new approaches coming forward. So this is a continuing theme that we'll touch on as we go through the panel discussion. I'd actually, we haven't talked for a second, for this panel yet, about some of these molecularly, so-called molecularly targeted drugs that are matched to a particular mutation in a patient. I'd actually like to turn to Gideon for a moment, because Gideon's been involved in the development of one of these drugs, vemurafenib, and is involved in the development of new medicines as well. But Gideon, there's a matched diagnostic that goes along with that provides the means to use these in a precision way. What are some of the successes and tribulations of that kind of approach, and how that rolls out in the clinic?
Okay, well, thanks, Louise, and thanks for including me in this panel. It is a very exciting time for us. It was just over 10 years ago, it was discovered that half of all melanomas, just to focus on melanoma for a moment, have one particular driver. We call it BRAF. And we're a small biotech company up in Berkeley, about 60 employees, and we immediately decided, let's try to make a drug and see if that'll help the patients. Now, only half the patients who have melanoma will have it. So in addition to making the drug, you had to make a diagnostic to make sure you're treating the right patients. So to do that, we partnered with Roche. Roche, it turned out at the time, had both the diagnostic and the therapeutic capability. So it was really a superb partnership. And it was just remarkable in about 2 years after we started the clinical trial, when we first started seeing the results in the patients. I think Omid mentioned most of the patients get a benefit from this drug if you select the one with the mutation. And so, I think it went very quickly from, first in human to approval. It was really one of the success stories of oncology 4 or 5 years ago. Now the reality is that most of the patients will relapse from this drug, and so it's been very rewarding also to see other developments in the field that have already been discussed, this immunotherapy. So in the field, it looks like, at least looking at melanoma, and I think it's playing out in other cancers as well, the targeted therapies, they're having a very high response rate. So most of the patients are responding, but they're relapsing almost universally. The tumor just finds a way around the drug. Immunotherapy seems to be fewer percentage of the patients respond, but when they do, it's much more durable. And so one of the challenges right now that all of us are working on, and that's where the collaboration has to come in, is to marry maybe a targeted therapy with an immunotherapy, or just to make an immunotherapy more broadly efficacious. So those are some of the things we're working on, and of course the whole cancer community is working on.
Great. And in this theme of partnerships, Jill and her colleagues at Merck have been very aggressive, actually, I would say as an observer, atypically so, in forming many partnerships to advance the drug that they've brought to approval. It was actually the first of what I think of as the second generation of these immunotherapies that was approved for melanoma patients in September of last year. Many interesting stories around this whole category of so-called anti-PD-1 drugs. But all of that said, I think, Jill, maybe you can comment a little bit on, from your perspective, your background in HIV and what Merck has been doing, how you see these partnerships playing out now, and what are the challenges and how they'll play out in the future.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for being here this afternoon and having the opportunity to chat with you. I wanted to be on the panel because I do think there's so much to be shared in terms of how we all, as a healthcare industry, are coming together. And that's quite different than it was many years ago when I first started in this industry. And I have had the opportunity to touch various therapeutic areas, and I think the analogy of HIV, looking at HIV as it pertains to cancer, has been a good roadmap for us. So if you think about in 1985, when you got a diagnosis of HIV, it was pretty much a death sentence. And you had a couple of years to live, and pretty much a physician would send you off and tell you to get your affairs in order. And today, the life expectancy of a patient diagnosed with HIV is really, they have the opportunity, if under the right care and treatment, to really live almost a normal life expectancy. And we went from movies that we saw where people were taking handfuls of pills to taking a single tablet regimen. And those advances in HIV came together in large part because of collaboration, and I think we talked about that early on. Daniel mentioned that. And it's collaboration with the advocacy community. They they've played an important role in cancer, and I'll comment on that in a moment, but certainly in HIV. Companies coming together that otherwise would have been kind of fighting each other in the trenches said, at the end of the day, the North Star is the patient, and so how do we help transform the patient? And so now it's really remarkable to talk to HIV docs and say that they now are primary care physicians and telling people to not smoke and eat healthy diets and live a normal life, and that's really great. What we take away from that in cancer, and as Louise mentioned, the opportunity to make this a more chronic disease, is how do we really understand how we can do that, and that's really driven through innovation. I think of CML, chronic myelogenous leukemia. If you think about that disease, the 5-year survival was around 30% 5-year survival of patients, and today it's 90%. People that have that diagnosis can live almost full life again because of the types of advances that have been made in CML. And as Dr. Hamid said, I think we're going to see the same kinds of advances in other cancers, but it's really people working together, and it's us understanding what Dr. Hamid is seeing at the bedside, us as industry understanding the challenges that are happening in the healthcare community, and certainly first and foremost, what are the challenges for the patient? And so I think there are many parallels, and I've had the good fortune of seeing those transformations happen in these important disease areas, and so we'll continue to work together.
Mm-hmm. And why Mayo is really on the front lines of having the opportunity to bring bench to bedside and back findings together, a major emphasis on individualized medicine, which of course is quite timely in people's thoughts right now with the President's announcement of his Precision Medicine Initiative. At the Mayo Clinic, what is going on in the area of individualized medicine, and how do you view it as being broad or narrow?
Sure. Well, thanks, Louise, and it's great to be here. I would say you started the panel out by saying, what do we need to do this year? And I couldn't agree more with Dan's comment. We need to collaborate. Mayo Clinic was founded on the principle of collaboration, simple as this may sound, even among your own doctors, among your own specialists. And we talk now a lot about precision medicine, but interchangeably you'll hear the terms personalized and individualized medicine. And they're roughly the same, but really personalized medicine that takes your own individual care, desires, nutritional status, environmental status, and genetic status into account is nothing new. And it's something that great practitioners of medicine have been doing for decades, and we've taken a lot of pride in at the Mayo Clinic. At Mayo Clinic today, just to kind of frame my comments, we are a organization of 60,000 care providers, about 4,500 senior physicians and scientists that cares for 1.3 million patients from 120 countries and every state in the United States. We have challenged ourselves to say providing a team-based model of care is great. Providing an unhurried exam is an important basic element to healthcare, and those are some of the things we've done for a long time. But how do we scale? How do we share our knowledge and scale what we offer from 1.3 million patients to 200 million patients by 2020? And we'll get there through partnerships. And what do we need to do this year? We need to get the job done with implementing the power of genomic medicine. The genome was sequenced after $3 billion and 13 years of effort, but that was done in 2003, folks. And here we are over 10 years later saying, finally, we're now experiencing, as you heard from our panelists, a sea change in how medicine is practiced. And our nation's doctors are struggling to keep up with this, because what we find is our nation's physicians don't have the background, whether it's in medical school or even in the ability to keep up, other than the kinds of experts that you meet in meetings like this. And so that's one challenge. So we created something we call the Center for Individualized Medicine. And what this does is it brings together teams of experts that are creating thoughtful but standardized approaches to some of the real challenges that we think genomic medicine and individualized or precision medicine can deliver solutions on. So patients with complex cancers that are failing standard chemotherapy, Let's get them into a center like ours, and we're not the only one, but we're one of the nation's leaders in this. Let's sequence either the whole exome, which are the known genetic genes in the genome, or the whole genome, and see if there's abnormalities that we can then target with specific therapies, like you've heard from some of our panelists, focused on the actual abnormality. This is not only a sea change in cancer, but what it's changing is the way physicians and scientists think about human disease, because now we can understand the molecular basis of so many disorders, including cancers, and we can target our approaches. And it turns out that sometimes a lung cancer can have more in common with a melanoma than it might with a different type of lung cancer. So it's not so important anymore what organ your cancer arose in as what's the molecular abnormality. And if you could pull up slide number 4, I just want to make sure to kind of bring this to life, the kinds of cases that we're talking about. This is a 51-year-old male who you see a front-on MRI of, and look in the upper right of the picture, that big gray area is his liver. It's a little hard to see in the back, but you see a bunch of dark areas in his liver. Those are metastatic disease. He had cholangiocarcinoma, rare gallbladder type of tumor, unresponding to therapy. He came to us bedridden in severe pain and preparing to die. After sequencing his genome, a never before described in cholangiocarcinoma genetic abnormalities found, the kinds of immunotherapy agents that you've heard about that sometimes were generated, in this case for lung cancer, our team through the Individualized Medicine Center applied to him. And here you see him 8 weeks later, the liver's about a third smaller, and you've lost all the areas of the tumor that was so active before. And the most important thing is it's about health span, not lifespan. So he goes from being bedridden on the right to riding his bicycle and enjoying his family on the left. His story's not over. We think he could have a recurrence. And so I don't mean to present this as a miracle cure, but his quality of life is back, and he now has a condition that we can manage and fight back on. That is the power of individualized or precision medicine. So we're very excited at Mayo Clinic to be helping to lead this effort and bringing it from the research teams and our partners in industry and not-for-profits and at Mayo Clinic and our research labs to the bedside. And that's the value that we feel an organization like Mayo can add.
Louise, can I just comment?
Please, yeah.
I just love the idea of individualized medicine, and that's why we came up with this whole idea of human-centered innovation, where every single member, every single patient, every single customer who utilizes the drugs that you develop, every single one of your patients, that they're different. What might be important for a senior to have a glow cap that lights up when it's time for them to take their med, or other types of social services that they need. A millennial needs an app on an iPhone that reminds them to get a checkup or certain nutritional benefits. And so if we have the scientists, if we have the combination of the researchers and the actual clinicians and world-class institutions like Mayo, we believe the role of the insurer is to build this circle around each individual. Not only the scientific support, the clinical support, but the social service support. And we think a major piece of that, and I know we're going to get into it in a little while, is how to take big data, how do you put it through a pipeline to get to an individual clinician, to get to a family member, whoever is relevant to the care of that individual, and then also building that network of care in such a way that real-time decisions can be made using real-time data.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so important. I mean, individual medicine, individualized medicine, precision medicine, personalized medicine, most doctors will say that they've always treated the patient in front of them. Mm-hmm. I think the power of what was generated in sequencing that first human genome has just exploded into technology improvements that allow us to do things today that were really inconceivable. I actually heard a researcher comment the other day that we're actually wasting all of our time sequencing all of these cancer genomes today. I was quite taken aback by that, because the fact that we know how to do what we can do, the speed and cost and the depth, it opens up so many more avenues to try to identify the causes of disease in individual patients and to be able to bring medicines to bear that suit them. And all of this data, which constitutes a flavor of big data, but is not the only kind of data that's being created, is critically important. I mean, imagine if we were in a position to be able to harvest from health records around the country how individual patients got their latest immunotherapy drug. Did they get 1 dose? Did they get 2? Did they get 10? How did they do? Did they recur? Did they wind up in the emergency room? It's this kind of big data analytics that I think actually opens a new frontier. And maybe you can speak to this, since you brought it up, Dan, a little bit about where this is headed.
Well, just think of, big data. I'm sure you've heard it several times at the various sessions you've been over the past couple of days, but data tucked away in a repository does no good. So the first thing is to build that connection from the data to the clinician, to every point of contact throughout the system. We've done it through a program called Navinet that we own with 2 other Blues and a company called Lumeris. And it started out as just a pipeline into physicians' offices to process claims and look up eligibility and that type of thing. Now we're starting to use it for clinical means and to get this real-time information to the doctor about that individual member, patient, at the right time. An example is diabetes. We talked about diabetes earlier. We came up with the Langone Institute at NYU with machine learned algorithms that we can put out to the physicians real time that predict who of their patients will be developing diabetes over some period of time. Well, can you imagine if you're a doctor and you sit across from Mr. Smith or whoever it might be, and you're able to see the different indicators that say, hey, if we don't change this path here, it's going to develop diabetes. And once the diabetes, the onset, it is a chronic, lifelong, can be debilitating, high cost. But if you begin, whether it's nutrition, whether it's some medical regimen or pharmaceutical regimen, whatever it might be, you begin to make the changes in life pattern. And it can be done by the clinician looking at this robust, granular, real data that tells a story about a population and about an individual patient member.
Exactly.
Can I just follow up? And I was just curious your opinion from our perspective as drug makers. My preference would be that someone shows up at the physician with a tumor, you just take that tumor and just sequence it. But we're still probably several years, maybe many years away from that. But I guess it brings up a whole new set of questions about what do you do with that information. But do you see in the future as that being a standard of care, even if you might not find something actionable? Absolutely.
I think it's kind of, we talk in terms of, earlier this week, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shung talked about some of the research he's done in genomics related to cancer. And what he has is a control tower concept where a clinician can be sitting in a room at the Mayo Clinic, and the insurer can be at the other side of the table, and the actual doctor is looking at the same set of information. And once you have that information, it's filed away forever. And you begin to develop individual repositories of information that tell a story over time about that individual person. Now, obviously, HIPAA and other regulatory issues need to be adhered to, but we do see a time where absolutely that's the case.
And I think, if I may, that one of the critical elements is making sure that patients are getting cutting-edge treatment. And one of the solutions is to develop care algorithms for patients with melanoma or with gallbladder cancer. And so you develop those algorithms, bring teams of experts, multidisciplinary teams, and it can be from across organizations and types of organizations, and come together and develop algorithms and then share them broadly. There's been a little bit of this in medicine today, but it's been very siloed. We're a large enough organization, we began developing our own internal algorithms. I'm an emergency physician, and if I want to treat atrial fibrillation, what's the best recommended evidence? So we would have come together inside of Mayo to create this algorithm. We're realizing this is scalable, and there's a huge need for current cutting-edge treatment that doctors trust. And so that's for us. We decided we're not going to do mergers and acquisitions like you see across the healthcare landscape among large providers. We're going to scale knowledge and share knowledge. And so we now have a Mayo Clinic Care Network of over 32 healthcare organizations where we are sharing algorithms and learning from each other and sharing data so that we can harness that to benefit patients.
Just one other comment, and then I apologize. But when you think of from a cost perspective, and let's stick with the diabetes point. What's healthcare before the Affordable Care Act? 18% of GDP, predicted to be 25% by the year 2025. We have to cut into the costs. So think of the diabetes. Roughly 25 million Americans are diabetic today. By the year 2050, they're saying another 25% of Americans, unless we change the path, will be diabetic. Think of the cost impact, and that's one disease state, not even getting into cancer.
Right.
That's one disease state. Well, if you can cut that curve by 10 or 15% by getting real-time data and a team approach, a collaborative approach to each individual member, that's a game changer. Mm-hmm. And you can do that across multiple disease states. So I just had to add that.
No, it's an excellent point. And you know, we've been talking a fair bit about kind of the use of these new technologies, like the ability to sequence genomes of tumors very quickly and basically determining at the highest level of detail what's gone wrong in a tumor, really what's making it tick. Some of the discussion makes that sound easy, like we really know what we're doing, but in many cases we don't, frankly. It's a little bit of, until the doctors and the technology and the information comes up to speed, it's a little bit of guesswork. But there's also another layer to that I'd like to get Jill to talk about, and that is that some of the things that that you can imagine, you can see when you look at what's gone wrong in a particular cancer are maybe not common to that cancer, or maybe not what a particular drug was developed for and approved to treat. And so it actually, in the real world, puts a pharmaceutical company in a little bit of a bind because they can only talk about what they can talk about based on the clinical trials that were done. And so I might ask you to look a little bit into the crystal ball, Jill, and say, how can the latest information be disseminated to doctors and patients without getting into a drug label that you can talk about?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think one of the things as we think about communication, we talked about the pathway approach. So it's important, if you think about Dr. Hamid's point, that if somebody comes to the Angeles Clinic, that's terrific and they get great care by Dr. Hamid, but if you live in some place where he's not practicing, they might not get the same care. So the approach of pathways and the communication and linkage is really, really important. And again, organizations, whether it's a provider, a payer, physician, are working together to try and make sure that we're sharing that type of knowledge. And that's probably one of the best ways through the networks that are in place, whether it's Mayo talking to the Angeles Clinic or physicians coming to congresses like we just had it in Philadelphia, the American Academy of Clinical Research took place, and that's a great forum to share cutting-edge information. Taking the pathways that we just spoke about and making sure that physicians understand and nurses and the healthcare providers understand the implications of those pathways. And some of them are tried and tested, and some of them are modified over time, but it's continuing that communication. And I'd leave you with one last thought on this. Something that we have been looking at is really around health literacy. And I mention this because, you know, a lot of times we put information out into the field as a pharma company. And, you know, as whether it's Mayo or Blue Cross Blue Blue Shield, we're putting information out, but are people really able to understand it from a health perspective? It may be written at a certain grade level, but from a health perspective, if you're not trained as a clinician or a pharmacist, maybe it doesn't resonate. So we also try to take good care to make sure that what we have in the marketplace as we're all communicating out is of a language that you can implement and understand, and then also make sure that it's of an approach where a patient or a consumer or a caregiver, and in particular in cancer that's so important, that caregiver is usually the person that's helping navigate the payer structure and helping navigate the choices that are going to be made. So we always want to make sure that we have an eye on, can people really understand what they're looking at so that they can make the right decisions? Because we take years to develop a product. All of the industry does. And we make sure that it meets all of the requirements, and we talk about our labeled indications. But if you don't use it, if you don't take the diabetes medicine as it's supposed to, it's all for naught. So there's that fine line of appropriate communication. One of the talks, I guess, yesterday was around communicating in the digital age and communicating to millennials. And we have to take all of that into account as we really forge ahead to make sure that we have all of this great information and knowledge that we've amassed and get that out into the marketplace.
I think there's never been a time like today where we have so many not-for-profits working to bring us together, whether it's MRA, whether it's Cancer Research Institute, whether it's Prostate Cancer Foundation, whether it is, you can put anything there. But when you look from beginning to end, they are there to bring us together and educate, whether it's through fellowships for physicians to learn, whether it's through funding basic scientists to be there and to do their work in a rapid fashion in a time where funding is not available, and then moving it through to making consortia that brings the appropriate physicians together with the appropriate drugs, with the appropriate pharma companies. I can remember a time when I was standing next to Steve Hody, who's at Dana-Farber, and he was hitting literally his head against the wall trying to get two companies together to bring the only two drugs where we thought would work for melanoma together, and it took years to get the contracting done. Now, every week I see something that is a Merck-Bristol combination, it's a GSK, etc. Insert name here, insert name there. And then from there, bringing that forward to meetings that are set up specifically to disseminate information, whether it's through the internet or through bringing physicians together, somewhat like what MRA does. And then educating the patients, and a great example of that is the I'm the Answer to Cancer campaign that Cancer Research Institute has, and bringing it forth to educate the patients and educate the physicians together. And this did not exist before, and that model is not a singular model. It now exists through every malignancy type and through multiple organizations. And when you look at us sitting here, we don't just see each other at this meeting, we see each other at multiple meetings. I joke that I see my counterpart at UCLA more abroad than I see him in Los Angeles. And this is the time to take advantage of that. We're just going to move forward so rapidly.
You know, Louise, I think one of the other messages is that the power of individualized medicine is not limited to cancer. And we've touched on chronic diseases, but our center has focused on three areas: difficult cancers, and then an area we call diagnostic odysseys or medical mysteries. And what we found, a quick vignette, a 22-year-old male comes to us. For his entire life, he had been adopted. He had intermittent severe tremors that were disabling to the point where he couldn't write, he couldn't participate, he could barely feed himself, so he was severely disabled. He had been to half a dozen medical centers, excellent medical centers, who had done excellent workups for neurologic abnormalities and hadn't found anything. So when we sequenced his genome, what it did was it answered the question his parents had had, and he, for 22 years, which is what is causing this unbelievable tremor that was so disabling. And it was hereditary ataxia type 1, of which there are 100 known cases in the world. But by finding that out, it's a life changer for that individual and his family. And what it does, and in fairness, there's no known treatment for this, but now our neurologist and his neurologist at home knew what the condition was, could rally the world's literature on this condition and have been able to focus now on controlling his movement disorder to the point where he's now able to play sports, feed himself, and participate in life in a normal fashion. And so what we find is that with these diagnostic odysseys, about 30%, and these are people like this young man who've spent years getting worked up with no answer, about a third we can find an answer with the power of sequencing the genome. And then the third group, which is relevant to all of us, is what does my future hold? What does your future hold? So it's do we sequence genomes in well people so that you can predict what, or at least manage your health optimally? And again, there's ethical components to this, and there's personal components. So what our center does is we start with a unhurried visit with a genetic counselor so that you can decide, if we find out that you have a genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's disease that's hereditary, do you want to know this? Are you prepared to know that Mayo Clinic might know this and you might choose to have it shared with you or not have it shared with you? And what about in the future when we know more about the genetic code than we do today? So it creates some challenges, but that's a whole new exciting area of genetic counseling.
It's really a tremendous opportunity, and you know, rightfully so, one that you approach with caution because some people really don't want to know.
That's right.
They don't want to live with that foreshadowing of the future. And sometimes there are things that can be uncovered that it's not quite clear what you would do about it.
A risk for diabetes or risk for heart disease where you can at least manage your risk factors that you can control so that if you know you're individually at a high risk for these conditions, then you can take actions that will be powerful in helping to mitigate that.
Right, right. So, but I actually just want to ask you for a moment to talk a little bit more about kind of the business challenges that a non-academic practice, that is a smaller practice, faces in translating the latest and greatest treatments to patients. Can you just kind of pull back the curtain on that for this audience?
Like, you know, it's a difficult challenge for private practitioners who don't have the funding of a major academic institution to be able to bring these drugs to their patients. Gideon has developed a drug which is so great. You just write a prescription and you take it to the pharmacy and the cost is there. But these infusional drugs, these newer drugs with the cost, that's all borne in a practice as like you have to stock it in a warehouse. It's hard for me to talk about because I never became a physician to become a businessman. But at the end of the day, the cost of bringing these drugs in and the amount of time it takes to get reimbursed can take a clinic that is now working harder due to differences in reimbursement just to make it happen, and can force them into financial situations that are very tenuous. When new drugs are approved, it takes time for the insurance companies to get the right codes, the Medicare to pay, and we as physicians want to give it to everyone. We have patients lined up to get these drugs. The PD-1 drugs, we had patients coming to our clinic from Oklahoma, Italy, New York, places where some of these trials were not available. And all of a sudden now they're available locally. And the physicians' offices, the small one-person, two-person practices, are not situated to absorb these costs. We have to work on being able to support them in a way and find a way to allow them to move forward with these drugs so that their practices are not at risk.
Right. Can I just a comment on that? From our perspective, this is a real opportunity for collaboration between insurer and clinician. We developed a partnership, I might have referenced it earlier, with the Vita Healthcare Partners called Tandem Health. We're focused on the 5-county Philadelphia area right now. And the idea was initially to go out to primary care physicians, then get into specialty, focused on community-based clinics, and pull them into an organization, a contract with Tandem. Tandem is almost a third party which we go through to interact with the physician. And it was set up for a couple reasons. One, to allow individual clinicians in small group practices who would rather remain independent than go with one of the large institutions for whatever reason to stay independent. The payment structure is such that they see that they can spend more time with an individual physician. And we work on everything from helping them, pumping this information through the Navinet pipeline on formulary management, on accessing drug regimens that they need to treat a particular individual. And it helps you, it allows you to get back to why you entered the profession in the beginning, to have that human touch with bring your expertise and your skills. Time. Exactly.
Right. And at the Mayo Clinic, how are things like this being managed with these, there's something new, it seems like almost every week. In melanoma last year, it was every couple months.
Yeah.
How is this being managed in that kind of setting?
So in a group setting like the Mayo Clinic, what we do is embed these advances in the decision making of the practice. And so a quick example of that is a fairly rare cardiac condition is called long QT syndrome. It's asymptomatic until your heart stops. So it's a little bit of a problem. And yet there's a subtle change on the electrocardiogram, a little space between the big zig and a little bump. That space is called the QT syndrome, and if it's slightly prolonged, then it's a sign that you may have this. And so unfortunately, nationally, many physicians either ignore or don't notice this because it's a rare enough condition that they're not sensitized to it. We were very concerned about this within the Mayo Clinic, so we set up a decision algorithm where the electrocardiograms, which actually now have computerized readings and they're measuring all the intervals, feeds any lengthening of the QT back to the electronic medical record that alerts the physician with a secure electronic message to her email or patient record portal, so that she then sees that this patient has an abnormality on their ECG that you can no longer inadvertently ignore. And so to us, that embedding, making the right thing to do for patients, the easy thing to do, is really one of the keys to how we get physicians all humming along together. And I think the other piece is we feel quite strongly that we've touched on it with genomics, and now we're talking kind of about decision support. But our nation's physicians are not being educated for the future of healthcare. They're being educated for the past of healthcare. And so we operate a medical school in Minnesota, which we are radically revamping the curriculum, and we're launching a new medical school in Arizona so that we can create generations of physicians that are taught these skills in informatics, the skills in engineering, and the skills from the business community that we can bring to bear, not so much the solutions, but the skill sets, so that they can help measure and improve the healthcare system throughout their careers and not become victims of a healthcare system that they don't understand and that leaves them behind. So to us, that's a critical piece of the puzzle.
So that's a major catch-22 for me, because I always thought of, and I still think that people come into medicine want to be the Norman Rockwell guy, hanging out and speaking to it. So the idea of having to get an MBA in order to not be a victim, or or to do what we do in our practice at the Angeles Clinic, we have a physician who is a CEO who has that business background and spends half of his time seeing patients, half of his time ensuring that we don't get in those financial traps. We have to work to find a way to ensure that smaller groups have access to someone like that. It's a shame for me that I have, his name is Larry Pirro, so it's a shame for me that Dr. Pirro has to spend time doing this, because he is well versed on lymphoma, he's part of Stand Up to Cancer, etc. And I just don't see small groups having the bandwidth to do that. And this is how those individual independent groups are now going away. And it's not a Midwest issue, it's not a West Coast issue, it's happening on East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Florida, it's happening everywhere.
So the business of medicine is in fact one of the major considerations for the future, for sure. I think as we kind of come into the home stretch here, I wanted to actually ask you, Jill, to comment a little bit on the customers. So you have many customers, especially from your vantage in the commercial seat. What do you, sort of look into the future? What do you see as the single biggest opportunity for the future from the commercial perspective?
Yeah, I think as Wyatt had mentioned, if you think about preparing the future healthcare team, we need to be mindful of that, because yes, there are different skills that we talked about, understanding moving from an acute setting, which is what our healthcare system is prepared for and supports today, to a more chronic care system. If you think about what these medicines can do, we saw that film of that one patient. There are many stories like that. So how do we make sure that we're preparing for what the future payoff is, if you will, in terms of long-term survivorship? And how do we make sure that we handle that both from a healthcare community at large, and then as we're thinking about our own trials and development? One of the other things to think about as you're leaving this session, when we launch a product, as we have many products that we have been able to launch over the years, it's that first indication that's important, and then the follow-on research that continues. Gideon mentioned that as well. You keep learning as you go. So how do we keep preparing and providing that information so that we can continue this healthcare journey and make sure that we're getting the most out of a product? Today, the product that Merck has is in the second-line melanoma indication, and continuing to study in other cancers. We don't know what the future will be, but there are so many unanswered scientific questions in the treatment of cancer. We need to continue to invest. So I guess it's really three things: making sure that we are at the table helping to continue to shape what the changing landscape looks like, ensuring that we continue to drive innovation, and that has to come through collaboration, because the science is so challenging that we want to make sure that we're learning from each other. And then I think the third thing is, sitting at the table with all of the healthcare partners to ensure that we're learning from them as we continue to drive for the future. There wouldn't be stories like 15 million survivors of cancer in the United States today if we didn't collaborate and have this journey together. We don't want to change the course of that. I want to be able to tell you that we're continuing to have patients and people living with cancer over the years, and so I think that's all of us on the panel doing that.
That's great. Yeah. So I guess just in the last few moments, let me just make a quick run through down the panel. I'll start with you, Gideon, and I'll end with you, Dan. Gideon, from your perspective, what would be the most important step that could be taken to make sure that innovation continues to come out of the pipeline in 2 or 3 sentences?
Okay. Well, surprisingly enough, as a scientist, the biggest obstacle I see is the business. So we've talked about these exciting drugs, and we all need to collaborate to get them in place. And we've said that there are a lot of these collaborations that are coming together. And I want to put in a plug for the nonprofits, because I think they are really mediating a lot of these interactions, both preclinically and in the clinic. And so these are happening, but time is our enemy, and these take a long time. I mean, to do a preclinical collaboration, I would guess it's averaging just to be able to give compound for a study, 4 months for the contract, and for a clinical collaboration, 1 to 2 years. And it shouldn't be that long. I mean, these are, both parties want to do it. Why should it take 2 years to figure out how to do it?
So accelerate.
Exactly.
Great. Wyatt?
2 things. We've talked amongst ourselves, and we all agree that collaboration is critical. Collaboration of like-minded individuals that are focused relentlessly on bringing solutions and hope to patients where we don't have it today. So that would be point one. Point two is that it's harder and harder to fund innovation in healthcare. And so clinical revenues are doing this. The line is dropping, and it's becoming tough for our nation's centers of excellence to be financially viable. And NIH funding has remained flat, and in real dollars has decreased. So the amount of money available for discovery. So that actually comes back to point one. So the only way that we're going to continue this incredibly exciting journey in our country and internationally on healthcare innovation is to partner with the not-for-profits, big pharma, small startups, and come together and say, how do we work together to generate solutions for our patients? And we're doing it, and there is no more exciting time in the history of medicine than today. Thank you.
Great. Solution finding by collaboration. Excellent. Jill?
Just one point. You know what? We've talked a lot about collaboration, and I certainly support that. But one group that's been left out is really the government and the FDA. And they have a big role in this. And so driving innovation, they've taken steps to work with pharmaceutical companies, to look at breakthrough designation approaches to how do they streamline development processes, how do they work together. So the government is also at the table to make sure that there is a drive towards innovation. To take that 10 to 12 years that you hear quoted to develop a compound down to something a little bit more realistic if the compound warrants it. So they're definitely a party in this collaboration.
Right. You make a good point. And the FDA gets a black eye in a lot of spaces, but I would say on the oncology side, they've really been at the cutting edge of leading innovation in the regulatory process as well. Ahmed?
Well, I was going to say collaboration, but they took it. So I looked at, for me, it's always been mentorship. I would hate to think about a time where things have become so stressful and the timeline so short that we don't have the right people mentoring. I've come here in my career because I've had strong mentors who've taken the time and educated me appropriately. And whether it's in the pharma sector, whether it's in the basic science sector, whether it's in medical oncology or drug development, we need to ensure that those people who are great mentors, and I've seen it, you can look at a place like Memorial and the people that come from there. They come from not just the location, but the people there who have spent the time, who have been given the time to mentor. Because when you mentor and you create clones and copies, those clones are going to seek each other out in order to collaborate.
It's a different level of sharing of big data, frankly. What's in people's heads, the wisdom that's in people's heads, and the willingness to share it to create the next generation of people who are going to take care of all of us. Dan, you get the last word.
So, Louise, thank you for moderating this panel. I've learned a lot. I have to say, from my perspective, it's aligned incentives, and I think when you think of collaboration, people, whether you come at it from a science perspective, a clinical perspective, or you're a generalist like me, we all get into this field for altruistic reasons. You really want to help people get well, stay well, in whatever way you can, from each of our perspectives. But the truth of the matter is, in the business side of it, true collaborations work when everybody wins. So if we can set up incentive-based programs that, for example, Joe, if we can be helpful in, sure, drugs cost a lot. I know we're not going there, but the truth of the matter is, shouldn't we and Wyatt be able to work with you to identify other cost savings because of that drug regimen? So that's what I mean. If we can show ways that by working together, that the outcomes are better, the quality's better, and we drive down costs together, everybody wins. And especially in my opinion, the most important people in this whole process are this guy right here and the folks that are on the front line, whether it be specific to cancer or just serving any other disease state. So it's a lot collaboration with aligned incentives.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Well, I want to thank you all for your kind attention, and hopefully you've been able to take home some messages from this that really connect how innovative approaches and partnerships can move the needle forward to make these breakthrough medicines available to everyone. Thank you.